Hello there, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in today. In today's video, we're going to be looking at pneumatics. Pneumatics is basically the air supply system to the aircraft. So welcome. Thank you for tuning. We look at the sources of air supply on an aircraft, in flight and on ground. We'll start with in flight. In flight, the primary sources of air supply of an aircraft are the engines of the aircraft. Bleed air from the engines is the primary air supply source of an aircraft. Then the second source of air supply during flight is an auxiliary power unit. An auxiliary power unit is not used during the entire flight, but it is there to be used when needed. Should it be needed, the auxiliary power unit can be used for bleed air supply during flight. The next source we're going to look at, the next source of air supply during ground operation is the ground cut, or a ground vehicle that supplies air to the aircraft when it's on ground. So this is a third source of air supply on an aircraft, but this one applies only to the ground. Then a fourth source, which is mostly used during emergency, is called the ram air supply. Ram air supply is used mostly in flight. For example, if there's a scenario where we have some smoke in the cabin, it can be used to ventilate the cabin and remove the smoke from the cabin. So those are the primary sources of air supply on an aircraft. Next, we are going to look at the components of air supply system. Components of an air supply system, we have the source itself, of course, is the first component, and then we have various valves. We have check valves and pressure regulating valve to regulate pressure. We have flow control valve to regulate the flow of air from different position or different stages on the system. Then we also have various sensors that are used to sense the temperature and the pressure at different points in the system. So, and apart from the above, we also have ducts that are used to supply, because the ducts are the main components. Are the main components because these are the air that we get from the source uses the ducts to go to the various location or position when they are needed, or to various systems. They use ducts to travel. Basically, is the mode of travel of air, or from the source to the system that needs the air is the ducts. So ducts is the main is another main component in the system. So apart from actually, there is also leak detectors. Leak detectors are also used should there be any possibility of bleed air leak, the leak detectors are used to indicate to the cockpit or to various systems, so that a correct action can be taken in order to prevent damages to the aircraft that can be caused by bleed air, which is normally hot. Next, we're going to look at the consumers of this bleed air, or of the air system or air supply on an aircraft. The primary consumer of air supply is the air conditioning system. The air conditioning system uses air. It's the air that comes from the pneumatic system that is used by the air conditioning system. It cools it and then supplies it to the cabin at the right temperature to provide comfort to the cabin. This same air supply is the air that is used on pressurization of various systems. For example, if an aircraft has an hydraulic system that uses bleed air for pressurization, this is another use of the air supply. Also, an aircraft that have potable water, you find that sometimes bleed air is used to pressurize the potable water tank or reservoir on this system. The next use of bleed air is for de-icing and anti-icing. Some aircraft have wing anti-icing and engine intake anti-icing that uses hot air, and this hot air is the bleed air that comes from the sources that we've mentioned before. It is used for anti-ice and sometimes even de-icing of the intakes, and the wing. Some other aircraft have ozone converters. Yeah, the same bleed air, the same air is used by the ozone converter to the air is converted basically to oxygen, which is used in pressurization and the air conditioning system. So next we're going to look at a diagram here which shows the basic system of an Airbus, and I'll try to show you the various sources that we've mentioned and the components and the consumers from the diagram. So we'll start with the sources. We have three sources. We have the engines, which are used in flight, and we also have an APU that can be used in flight as well as on ground. Then our next source of supply is this ground cut that we talked about. This one can only be used on ground. And then our next source of air supply, I can see it's not shown here, which is the one used on emergency, and it's a ram air. So that is our final source of supply. And next we're going to look at the components. We'll look at these are ducts. You can see these are ducts that are used by the bleed air. You see the red one and this one, these are ducts. Then we look at the check valves. We have these valves here. This is check valve 1, this is another check valve, and this is another check valve that prevent the backflow of the bleed air back to the engines or to the APU. Next, we are going to look at these are flow control valve. In this case, we have a pressure regulating valve on both engines. We also have a cross bleed valve that prevents or allows the bleeding of air from one engine to the offside or vice versa. That's a function of cross bleed. Basically, it can isolate or allow the use of air from either side. Next, we look at the consumers of this air supply that we have on an aircraft. On this particular one, we have this one. The primary consumer can be engine starting for aircraft that has air starter, like for an Airbus. This air is used for engine start. So the air supply can be used to starting the engine on the offside engine, for example, or even the air supply from the APU can be used to start the engine. We also have a wing anti-ice valve, and this is particularly for an Airbus, but on another aircraft you can find that it is basically used for anti-icing, not necessarily for the wing, but even for the engine intake. Then we have air conditioning packs, which also consumes the air supply. And then hydraulic reservoir pressurization and potable water pressurization, as we mentioned earlier. We also have some aircraft that have cargo heating system, and this heating system also uses this hot air that comes from these pneumatic sources. On an Airbus, there is also this additional function which is fuel tank inerting system, but this is not on all aircraft. Remember, different types of aircraft have different systems and different components and different use of various systems. So this is what we had for you in this video today. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Thank you.